3 videos that will come out each week on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, highlighting the 3 parts of Bible study: reading, understanding, and doing. Right now, let's work on being better readers of the text. Make sure you've printed out your double-spaced copy of Philippians 1, 12 through 20, and we will get started. But as always, we first need to actually read the text. So here's some of us reading Philippians 1, 12 through 20.
I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ.
And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill.
The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment.
What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice.
For I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance.
As it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death.
Well, if I'm honest with you, that's the best part of the video, is just the simple reading of the word itself. I cannot compete with that with anything I'm going to say, but hopefully you'll continue to watch. If you're still watching, let's bring out some things that we like to look for as we read any text. First, we look for repeated words, things that we then underline in black. Gospel, big one in verses 12 and 16. It's used twice, but it's also in the previous passage as well. It is important to remember that even though we're looking at just a section of about 8 verses, it's not something that we look at by itself. We have to consider what is happening before it and after it when we look at it. But gospel is going to be a key theme in this text. Imprisonment, that's used a few times, 13, 14, and 17. We've already established that Paul is in prison, and he continues to talk about being there in this text. That's going to be important. Christ, I mean, that seems like an obvious one. I feel like anytime we're reading the New Testament, we're almost always going to have some reference to Jesus, but I'm underlining it anyway. The word defense, another word that's only, I think, used once in this part of the passage, but also in the last one. We should look into what defense of the gospel means. The word proclaim, verses 17 and 18. When we look for repeated words, they can be different tenses. So one, I think, is proclaim, one is proclaimed, but that still is the same word, an important word for this passage. The word rejoice, repeated twice and close together. We did establish the importance of joy for this entire book of Philippians, but that's another key word. And then prayers, only used once in this passage, but an important theme of last passage is still important in this passage here. Then we move on and we look at statements about God. Now, there were some that were very direct and obvious in verses 3 through 11, a little bit less so here, but Paul mentions the help of the Spirit of Christ. And I think that that's a good thing to circle so we can look at that in a little more detail. Keep in mind, when we talk about God, it could be referring to the Father, the Son, Jesus and Christ, the Holy Spirit. God is a Trinity. He is 3 in 1. One God, 3 persons. We're not going to go into that right now, but just keep that in mind as we consider how we look for those things. But I did circle help of the Spirit to look at in a little more detail. Then our transition words. I'm not going to go over every and but right now. However, there's 2 that I want to draw your attention to for this video. It is so that starts out verse 13. And 4, that's at the start of verse 19. And I'll touch on these in the next video. Of course, you should look at all of them and box those in. Then we move on to blue, and we do a few other things. We'll underline any unfamiliar words. Now, some of these may be the same as the repeated words, and that's okay. But there's 2 that I wanted to point out in this, and you may have more, and that's great. But Imperial Guard, mentioned in verse 13, who is that? Who is the Imperial Guard? And then a good definition for the word pretense in verse 18. I wanted to get those two things. Lists or points in a row that we number in blue. There's one list that's very short. It's in verse 19, and it's 3-year prayers and then the help of the Spirit of Christ. Something that we'll go to in our next video and talk about. And then lastly, the confusing ideas. The what has happened to me in verse 12. What has happened to Paul? And this has been established, but I think it's still a good thing to bring out. What is he talking about? Confident in the Lord in verse 14. What does that mean, to be confident in the Lord? Verse 20, it says, I will not be at all ashamed. And he says, but Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. What does he mean by not being ashamed? And how does this relate to his life or his death and those kind of things? We need to vet that out and understand that. So what did I miss? Is there anything else that you would add? Be sure to comment that below so that we can talk about those things. And then lastly, in red, write all this out. Write out your focus words. Write out your statements about God. Write out lists. Write out any questions that you have. It will help us later refer back to it and see it more wholly. First in our understanding phase, but then as we look at later passages in the book of Philippians. Now you need to do this part on your own. I'm not going to bring it all out for you here. I want you guys to be working on it all by yourself. And we will see you back here for understanding Philippians 1, 12 through 20 as we continue to read. So continue reading it daily. Be vigilant in prayer, guys. Love you all. We'll see you later.